Professor, welcome to the show and thank you for coming on. Talk to me, tell me about your own podcast that you have going on. It's super interesting.
So it's called Let's Talk Hope. And within the podcast, we're trying to discuss everything really about suicide and especially the stigma that's attached to suicide and the different facets of it. So the stigma that's there when people go and try and seek help, the stigma that's associated with being bereaved by suicide, and just the general stigma about talking about suicide within the general population.
Why do you think there is such a big stigma around suicide, attempted suicide, and really just our struggles now in the real world?
Yeah, I think there's something different when people think about suicide. It's as though it's something you can catch or a behavior that, people don't want to be associated with. And I'm not sure whether this comes from historically it being a criminal act and, the kind of legalities around it, whether in religion, in many religions, it's seen as an act that shouldn't be done as well. So I don't know if it comes from kind of historical issues like that within society, but there's definitely a stigma where people feel really uncomfortable talking about suicide. And I think it was the same about cancer in previous years where you'd have the big C, and no one would want to ever talk about it. Whereas I feel like that has reduced over time. I think with suicide, more and more people are speaking about it who've been bereaved by suicide. They're trying to do things so that other families don't go through the same thing. But what I'm learning through that as well is some of the isolation people are getting who are bereaved by suicide as well, just because people don't want to be associated with someone where that's happened because somebody in their family might think about suicide through association. So yeah, I'm still trying to understand it myself, but it's definitely something that's evident.
Do you think it could be due to the lack of our understanding with regards to the mechanism of, say, depression and mental illness? I think, as a cell biologist, I study diseases, and it's a bit more easier to pinpoint, let's say, the mechanism of asthma or COPD. But I was actually talking to a VC yesterday about psychiatry, and it's very sort of difficult to understand the mechanism of action in all of these sort of illnesses affecting the mind. And so that sort of the fear of the unknown sort of may initiate that sort of stigma. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of work this week actually looking at interview transcripts for people who've been in care for a long time. So hospitalized for depression, psychosis. And I think one thing that really stood out to me was some of the staff talking about their lack of training within basics of mental health. So they're working on a psychiatric ward or an acute ward, but they don't actually really know what bipolar is. They're not quite sure what personality disorder is. And I was just reflecting, thinking, could you imagine someone working in like kind of heart disease, not knowing the elements of a heart and what a blockage might do, or if something's not quite working. And I just thought I feel like there's a bit of, lack of respect in a way for mental health, and even the thoughts behind training people and having specialised people in a ward where people have come in with quite significant mental health issues. You should be getting specialists there to work with them, but it doesn't feel like that's what's happening. And I think that's something to do with where mental health sits within our system. So yeah, I definitely think it's to do with different mechanisms, but I don't think we're taught about it in the same way that we are for physical health issues.
Yeah, I think it's one of the beauties of the mind, but the curse of the mind is that we can't see the mind, we can't quantify it. In cancer, we can look at a tumor, we can take a biopsy, we can do genomics on it, and we can really understand what's going on. But with the mind, we can't quantify it. And I think that's one of the difficulties when it comes to first understanding mental health in sort of a public opinion, but also understanding the causes of mental health on, let's say, a therapeutic or diagnostic sort of level. But also, I think potentially our attitude to, let's say, behavior is quite simplistic, right? With regards to, we look at, if you don't want to eat the cookie, don't eat the cookie, change your behavior. And I think with mental health, especially maybe, let's say, in the early 2000s, it was very sort of just don't feel sad sort of thing. You're just being negative. So do you think it's just our attitude to, we still look at mental health as sort of a change of behavior sort of thing, rather than, probably not given as much empathy as we should?
Definitely, I think there's a lot of lack of compassion. And I think even culturally, we come from a similar background, Aaron, and I think culturally is very much you get on with it. If
Yeah.
there's no such thing as being depressed, there's no such thing as mental health. Just brush yourself down and get on with it. And if you don't, I think there's a real weakness that's highlighted in a person. I think even within our communities and other communities, there's a little bit more openness now for thinking about how we talk about mental health, and people are a bit more open to it. But I definitely think when I work with mental health services, you kind of get some staff who say things like, well, you don't really want to harm yourself. You don't really want to do this to yourself. And people get quite frustrated and they say, well, obviously I don't. But the way it's said is in a way that they have control, a lot more control over what they're thinking and what they might do or have done. And I think that's the bit where we're really lacking compassion and empathy.
I think on the topic of compassion and empathy, well, first of all, I don't think it's anything malicious. I think it's purely due to the lack of understanding and the fear of the unknown. But obviously, I'm someone who's passionate about men's health and men's mental health, especially, given these worrying stats that 75% of suicides are committed by males. And I think suicide is the leading cause of death of under 50s in the UK, which is a very much shocking statistic. And I think one of, let's say the issues with regards to men's mental health is talking about it, being open about it. And I'm very interested in sort of the differences between genders with regards to how they approach mental health specifically. Why do you think men find it hard to be vulnerable and really sit with their feelings? Do you think it's due to the lack of emotional maturity? Or is it just how we're wired? Is it because of stigma, because of culture, how we believe the world should perceive us? What's going on? I'm sure there are multiple variables at play, but yeah.
Well, I think my views have changed over time. So initially, I read up a lot on gender norms, especially when I was doing my own PhD kind of 15, 16 years ago. And there's definitely, the norms that are seen for masculinity and how you should be. And, you should always be tough and be able to look after everyone and be out earning and those kind of traditional male roles. And if some people feel like they're not meeting those, they may feel quite hopeless. But then there's also a lot of evidence to say men don't seek help as much as women. But when I did my work it was for people who had died by suicide and they had had contact with mental services in the year prior to death. What I found is that a significant number, over 90%, were going to primary care in the weeks and months prior to death. But in primary care, the GPs were doing their best, and it's not a negative on them as professionals, but they didn't have the appropriate places to refer men or women to, but more so I'd say men. We know that men are less likely to stay in A&E. So if they do go to accident and emergency departments, they're less likely to stick around if they haven't got a physical health problem than women are. So I think there's a lot of lost opportunity there where men may have gone to seek help, but then may not have thought it's the right place for them, or they can visually see people coming in with a bleeding head and think, why am I sat here? I'm taking their place kind of thing. That's what we hear back in the literature. But what I think I came to the conclusion of by the end of my study was we need more appropriate services for men in the community. And I know that you know about James's Place, but that's what led to the kind of idea of speaking with other people who had a similar mindset about a community-based men's suicide crisis centre. So what's changed over time is, if I was going by the literature, it's the fact that men don't seek help. They don't talk about their feelings. But if I'm going by my experience of my work, a lot of men did go to seek help, but there wasn't necessarily the right help available for them within the NHS that might have met their needs. And they didn't necessarily need to be admitted to hospital, but they needed support with their suicidal crisis.
I think it's paradoxical. As a man, I don't speak for the whole men's community, but I think as men, it's wired into us, and it almost gives us purpose and, let's say, fuel to add to the fire, that we have this sort of need to protect and serve, and it's our duty. And we thrive on that. I think it's one of the reasons why we like to go to the gym. We like combat sports, or we like to work a lot. And so this sort of, let's say, this sort of idea of vulnerability comes along, and this issue with your emotions you just can't grasp and you can't get a hold of seems so alien to us that we normally just suppress it, and we repress it, and we sort of put it in a little box, and that's sort of it, and we don't talk about it. But it's paradoxical because we still have this sort of notion and this idea that if we were to open up, that it would almost be emasculating. I saw this TED talk from this psychologist, I forgot her name, and she cited one of the men who came up to her. He said, "My wife and my daughter would rather see me die on top of my white horse than fall off it." And, part of me sort of resonates with that, with the fact that we feel like we have this duty, and it gives us purpose to really go out there and fight for our family and for the people that we care about, and that we can't show that sort of side of weakness, as if we're almost letting other people down. And one of the issues potentially with, say, the NHS model, the traditional sort of A&E model, is that you come in and you get treated as a patient. And you'll probably talk more about James Place, but I think when I did my reading on James Place, one of the great things about James Place was you come in, but you're not treated as a patient.
Definitely not.
You're treated as just a guy who's having some struggles and just wants to sit down in the presence of other men. And you don't even need to talk about it. You just want to sit there. And maybe do some activities, some sort of team building stuff and some, guy stuff. And before you know it, it's, I think it was a 39% sort of improvement or whatnot after.
So in James's Place, you have intervention. So you do have like a one-to-one talking therapy.
Yep.
And you can then go into some group kind of peer support activities, or you might get referred to other charities that do a lot more, like you're saying, activities where people can do things together. But in James's Place, the men who come in there are in a kind of critical, if you like, suicide crisis situation. And they have normally 6 to 10 sessions where they will speak about how they got there and what's kind of helped them before, if they've been in that situation. So kind of working towards a safety plan, and then what they're going to do if they find themselves in that position again. So they kind of leave with the plan, but they also work through some cards which are based on kind of suicide theoretical underpinnings, whether it's about thwarted belongingness, hopelessness, physical reactions, so not sleeping, not eating. And they go through these cards as well, where they can visually place how they're feeling or maybe what got them there. But then there's different packs of cards that maybe of what you might do now. So you can see the movement throughout your therapy. So within that, I think what a lot of men have said is, firstly, it felt very homely when they came in. They were offered a cup of tea and it's like a living room, really.
Yeah.
So it's very homely. They're not judged for being suicidal. And a lot of the time, the therapists spend the first session kind of listening to them and kind of going, we understand why you're feeling this way with this whole list you've just given us of what's going on in your life at the moment. Maybe it validates their feelings as well. And then obviously they can, in their own time, co-produce their kind of therapy in a sense with the therapist and work towards, better outcomes for themselves. And they can come back as well if they did feel suicidal again in the future. So it's a model that seems to be working, but they're not put on waiting lists. They're seen within 48 hours of being in touch. And even if they don't meet the criteria, so if somebody comes in and basically has always been suicidal, but doesn't seem to be imminently, they may have really bad issues with housing or debt, and they will work with them to link them with the Citizen Advice Bureau or whoever the relevant people are. So they won't just say, oh, you don't meet the criteria, that's it. It will still be a conversation. It still might be a few hours of working with someone to try and help them. And also say the doors are always open if you need them. For some men, it's been enough just to know that that's on their doorstep and they've not used the service in the end, but they may have come back 6 months later, or hopefully they've been better. So I think it's the accessibility, it's the environment that they're in, it's having people who are willing to just talk about the suicide and the thoughts of suicide and not brush around and want to know your whole history in a sense to try and, spend weeks working out why you might be suicidal. So I think it's that kind of rapid access and the rapid process within the therapy that men seem to find really helpful. But one massive thing for me has been, there's been a lot more men coming there who are employed. So one thing we thought is that most people would be unemployed because of, statistics. But there's a lot of people in employment, there's a lot of students, and actually it's keeping them employment, it's keeping them completing their degrees. So I think it's having a much bigger purpose than even just helping someone not end their lives. It's also helping keep them living their lives, which I think is really positive.
I have so many points to go from this because this is so positive. First of all, this is sort of a notion and a hypothesis. Do you think the aspect of being in an environment around other men who are in a similar situation to yourself is actually very helpful? And the reason I say this is because, I don't open up with my mates as much as I should do. But when I do, I come out of that situation so much better because I know it's not just me. It's like your 20s, okay, they're meant to suck sometimes. It's all right. It's not like you're the only guy in the world who's lost a relationship or is losing money or, is struggling in his academic sort of career, whatever. Like it's normal. And I think that sense of normality provides a bit of confidence and sort of comfort with regards to that. And secondly, have you heard of Richard Reeves?
I've heard of Richard Reeves.
So I think he's the founder of the American Institute for Boys and Men. Anyway, he cited a study, and I haven't gone to the primary source, but he said that when they looked at the notes of boys and men who eventually took their own life, key common words that they described themselves was useless and worthless.
Uh-huh.
And so a lack of purpose in life. And I think this is why I'm very interested about these sort of gender differences, because I think men really put their identity and place their identity on their job and their career and their sort of purpose in this world. And so it was an interesting stat from your paper with regards to only 11% of men cited that they had a mental illness. And the rest of them were because, they had a loss in the family. They broke up with their girlfriend or
Relationship breakdown.
Divorce. Or,
the biggest thing.
Like stress. Yeah. Like it's super funny almost, where I don't want to say funny, but how you can be in this great relationship and suddenly it takes a turn and you're left with this void where you don't have anyone in your life. You have lost that sort of purpose. And so, yeah.
So I think coming to a couple of points, I think the men using the service don't necessarily all connect with each other. Some may.
Yeah.
join like the peer support. But I think seeing the fact that other men are coming in and out
Yeah.
are in the same position,
Yeah.
I've heard many of them say that it's a bit of an eye opener that it's not just them. So they don't feel maybe it's only me who's going through this. There are actually other people. And I think there is some comfort in that.
Yeah. 100%.
So yeah, definitely on that note, but I don't think they necessarily connect with each other because of that. But what many of the men have spoken about, and this is in my other podcast as well, is one of the men who is on there actually used James's place.
Mhm.
But I hear similar stories even from men using other services, is that they then feel empowered to talk to their friends. They're quite surprised that because they're opening up, even some of their friends will kind of go, yeah, I felt like that, or, oh God, I've been feeling like that recently too. And it suddenly starts this whole new level of conversation that this group of guys have never had. So going to women, I think we're quite good at that. We're quite
Mhm.
good at offloading. We're quite good at using each other for our support systems. Um, I've been doing a lot of work again with hospitals, and if there's a lot of increasing significant health issues for young women, suicide rates, unfortunately, are getting much higher in menopausal age women. So 45 to 55 has always been a high group, but it's increasing, and for young women. And one of the things I've picked up on is those social networks are decreasing. So, not having a great relationship with your mother for some of these young women, or not having a good relationship with family, not having a partner in your life, not having those friendship groups, and the groups you are friends with, it's a lot of complexity and, chaos, whether it's drugs and alcohol or promiscuity, a lot of kind of unsafe behaviors. So I think things are changing, not for the better in females. I also think there's a lot more pressure, like you've described, for men about the work and the earning and the purpose. Obviously, we're trying to get more gender equality when it comes to pay gaps and women getting opportunities in senior roles and that kind of thing. But with that, to an extent, comes a price, because the female element is maybe you've always had the role of being the person looking after the home, looking after the family. And if you're now in a senior role that's quite demanding, you can't do everything because you're going to lose control of your own self. So I think there's other gender differences that are coming through. And what we're finding with the women who are age 45 to 55, they may never have had mental health issues, but they're very impulsive. And a lot of their reactions to this kind of breakdown in their thoughts is very similar to men. And that's maybe why we're seeing a bit of an increase, because some of those women are becoming more impulsive. But we're finding it's in a lot of women who have got pretty, good jobs, they've got a family. And is it some of these issues you've talked about for men that are kind of seeping through now for women as well? I'm not sure, but it's something I've been thinking about, as a career woman myself, and also coming from a cultural background where it's expected that as the mother, as the wife, as the daughter-in-law, the sister-in-law, the daughter, you have many, many responsibilities that do fall more on you. And that is our cultural kind of upbringing. And as much as you fight against it, I think it's within us as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting that balance right is quite demanding.
Do you think we put too much pressure on ourselves?
I think we do, to be honest, in some cases. I also think we don't give consideration for some of the complexities that are going on in people's lives, and even to ourselves, And I think that, what I said to you about when people go into James's place or similar, and somebody kind of says, wow, you've got all of that going on. No wonder you're feeling like this. I think sometimes having a reflection where somebody says, that's not surprising, can be enough to make you maybe stop and take focus on what's important and trying to help yourself a bit better, rather than thinking you're in a normal situation, other people cope with it, but I'm not, which I think is what we maybe sometimes do. I think there's a lot of comparison, and even more so with social media and everything, where we think everyone's life is perfect apart from our own. But I think sometimes if someone actually allows you to say, no, that this is quite significant what you're going through. Maybe that helps with the recovery process. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I'm very interested in social media and the effects on our neural networks over the next decade or two, not only with regards to mental health, but also, let's say, as well. But I think social media is great to a certain extent, but I think one of, let's say, the toxicities associated with social media, which is why, I really respect your podcast, is the fact that everyone puts their best self out there. And even for men, like I was talking to my mate last week about this, and he's only 24, and he's like, you have all these guys that are just earning X, Y, and Z money. They have all these cars. Like, what am I doing with my life? And for a second, it seeped into me, and I was like, okay, what are you doing with your life, Aaron? Like, come on. But then after that sort of brief bout of introspection, I said to him, look, you're 24 years old. You're not 40. You're not 50 years old like these guys that you look up to. And even those who are your age, who's making millions of money, how do you know, number one, they're making millions of money and it's not just a cover? And number two, you don't know what's going on in their life. I think comparison, it sounds very, very cliche, but comparison is the thief of joy. And
Definitely.
I think now where we have access to anyone in this world and their life or their perceived life, we're naturally put into this sort of mode where we need to compare ourselves with everyone. And so when you spin that and then you look on someone who's having, like, say, an acute suicidal crisis, it's a negative feedback, because then it's, why am I the only one having this? Why isn't, the influencer I follow on Instagram, why is he not having these sort of bouts of suicide? And so it becomes this sort of rabbit hole that you go down in. And that's one of, I'd say, the toxicities associated with social media, is that we are constantly comparing ourselves to everyone else.
Yeah. But
Yeah, please.
I think as well as that, on the flip side, within social media, we do have a lot of people who are being quite open and honest about having suicidal thoughts, and, whether it's boxers or footballers, or artists, music artists and things. We're obviously hearing about suicide deaths within the media as well, which sparks other conversations. But I do think some of the conversations that are happening are having a positive effect as well, that some people are actually showing their vulnerabilities, and they are showing that you might think I've got a perfect life, but actually these are the struggles that we're having. And one of the episodes on the podcast really focuses on this, about even the pressures on people who, maybe like a top footballer, but then you've got the pressure from a young age of, you're paying the mortgage for the family. You're now looking after your siblings and your parents, and there's another pressure as well as succeeding within your craft, and how that may become a real burden for you, and you might become quite isolated. So I think when you realize, after doing comparisons, because we've all gone through it probably at one stage in life where you do that, when you realize that actually people are humans behind it, and everyone has different type of stresses and everyone has different type of pressures, your mindset changes. I think, unfortunately, if you can't see that and you don't see those other sides of people, and, money doesn't necessarily bring happiness, for example, it's very tough if you spend your time comparing yourself to others. The saying you just said before, I think is really true. I think you can be your own worst enemy, essentially.
Yeah. It's this is something that I've sort of struggled with, where it's, a friend told me this, she was like, you put so much pressure on yourself. And it's like, yeah, because, I want to reach X, Y, and Z. I want to, be the best that I can be. And it got to a point where I said to myself, okay, yeah, you've achieved X, Y, and Z, but when are you going to live in the present moment? And I think that's one of the key concepts that has sort of pulled me out of this dark hole that I've been sort of facing over the last year and a half or so, is this sort of element of not only gratitude, but really immersing myself in the present. And I think, a technical term for that is mindfulness. And when you start to immerse yourself in the present and you realize that every single moment that you have is just gone, you start to appreciate it a bit more. And throughout that, you start to, think about yourself, you become more introspective. You start to not worry about other people, but you just focus on yourself in sort of a positive way. Do you think we take the little things for granted? And I don't want to come across as being crass or as this as being quite selfish, but I think one of the things I told myself when I was in a dark place was you're alive, you're breathing, you have all four limbs, and you have a family to go back to. Irrespective of what they think of you, you have a home, you have a career, like you have all of these sort of things. Don't throw it away. Like you have the ability to get better and to recover and fulfill your dreams. And it was really telling myself that, there are people out there who don't have those opportunities like you do. And don't be wrong, we all have, our sort of issues and we have to work through our obstacles, whatever would it be. But it was really sort of almost reframing this sort of weakness that I was seeing myself into more
Hmm.
of a, you need to get up and fight sort of thing.
Yeah.
And count yourself lucky that you're living in a world where you have access to information, you can access to NHS, clean water, food. Like, come on, pull your socks up, sort
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think one thing I've said to many friends, family, colleagues, obviously I work in suicide prevention. So a lot of people disclose to me if they are feeling like they're in a crisis. Many times the people who've come to me in a crisis are people who are real doers. They're people pleasers is what I'll say. They want to be seen in a good light. They want to do the right thing. And to many I've said, you used the word before, you need to be a little bit more selfish.
yeah,
Being selfless all the time is not healthy. So that's one characteristic I've seen in just people I'm, associated with, is being really selfless all the time when it comes to your children, your partner, your family, your friends. And then I think also there's some people who expect that because they do things, people will do it for them. And when it doesn't happen, they feel really mortified and really distressed. And I said, you shouldn't have expectations. That's another thing, is not to expect just because you want to do things and that's your personality, that other people want to do it back or need to do it back. And maybe what they're doing actually is healthier, is having boundaries on helping themselves before others sometimes. So I think you have to get a really good balance of, mindfulness is a word you've used again, putting your own needs. It's kind of what they say on an aeroplane, put your own oxygen mask on before you put it on for other people. I think it's the same thing about well-being. You have to make sure your wellness is there before you can give your own self to others. So that's one thing. But another thing, what you talked about that kind of appreciation for the little things. Within my line of work, I read quite a lot of horrifying, complex situations some people are born into. And I think that for me keeps me grounded. And I do sometimes want to share some of these stories with my own children, for example, who I think, they don't want for anything. And those behaviors then come with it where they just think everything's normal, that you get everything handed to you. And I think it's good sometimes to have the education about others and what others may have or not have, to have a little bit of appreciation for the little things, like you're saying. And I think that is a healthy thing. I mean, you don't want everyone to sit there watching the war or some of the things on the news daily, but I think you should be knowledgeable about what's happening. And actually, a simple thing you said there, clean water. So many nations in the world do not have access to clean water, and you can't even imagine what that might be like. So yeah, I think being knowledgeable, being educated is really good for our own wellness and well-being, and being a bit more selfish to your own needs as
yeah.
well.
There's something you don't hear often is be selfish, but I think it's so important. It's
Yeah.
so important. It's a revelation I came across maybe a couple months ago, which was stop being a people pleaser, put boundaries and really be selfish, put yourself first.
Maybe that needs to be a title for a podcast.
Yeah, who
I
knows?
think
We might put it for this one. Just be selfish. There we go. But I think it seeps. I'm coming back to men because it's really. I've been spending the last couple months really trying to understand this sort of paradox between being a dutiful man, but also being someone who's emotionally intelligent. And I think what men may misconceive is that if they don't talk about their problems, then it's okay. But instead, what you want to do is fix that problem, work on it, so you can then be a better provider and a better dutiful person for everyone else, like you said. And I think that's not just for men, but for everyone. And I think maybe it's a bit of a taboo sort of, let's say, internal debate that we have within ourselves, that if we have these sort of feelings and these struggles, we tend to put it in the box because we don't want to admit that we're sort of having those feelings. How could one be more in touch with their feelings? Because it's difficult to sit there with your feelings and not get distressed without sort of losing it almost.
I think everyone's different. Everyone's individual. You've got to find what works for you as a person. And I think that's where co-production comes in to, therapy. I really think it's a two-way street. I don't think a therapist can tell you, for example, how you should be feeling or how you might get yourself to feel that way. So I think it's some inner, if you like, thinking you need to do. But it could be that for yourself, doing that with other people is healthier than, like you said, doing it on your own,
Yeah.
where you might then start ruminating
Yes.
and getting yourself into a negative thought pattern, which is not necessarily helpful. Activities, I talk about this, I think, all the time. So my go-to, if I'm having a dip, is a jigsaw or a book, or potentially a Netflix series or something. You've got to find your own place. For others, it might be going to the gym. My latest activity is golf. My kids all play. My husband plays, and I used to go along, so I started playing. But actually, something I recognized when I started to play 9 holes was I don't think about anything apart from trying to hit the ball accurately towards a hole. That's all that's going through my head. And I might get frustrated with how I'm playing. But for 2 hours, I'm in nature. I didn't bother if it was raining, cold, hot. I've enjoyed it every time. But in that 2 hours, something happens that's really positive for my mind. And I don't know whether it's just being outside, the energy that's happening, the fact that I do not even think about my phone, my emails, my work. I managed to actually shut down my brain, which is really difficult. I think in today's day and age I'm awful if my phone beeps. In a meeting, for example, I really think I should be strict and not look at my phone. Because if I was sat with people, I wouldn't. If I'm online like this and I'm in a group meeting and my phone pings, I will look at it at the same time and you lose your focus, And I think we do that too easily now, which I don't think is helpful for our health. So I think finding activities, finding people that you can actually shut down in a really positive way and recharge maybe. But I think if you know that sitting on your own for hours, trying to think about things is going to end up having a negative impact, it's not good. Like, really can't use meditation apps. There's something about that music that actually starts to wind me up because it's trying to relax me. I don't know what it is. Whereas my husband finds it really helpful. So I think you've got to just be realistic with yourself. This isn't working for me. This is working for me. And make sure you tap in. I see my girlfriends, some school friends, at least once or twice a year. And we laugh that we're each other's medicine and that by the end of the weekend, we've had a dose of that medicine that recharges us. And as much as we joke about it, it's a reality. It really does have such a positive effect, but it's certain people as well. That wouldn't be with every girlfriend I've got. It's certain people. So I think you've got to find that within your own lives of those people that bring you up, keep you grounded and keep you well. I think essentially.
Have you heard of the Men's Shed initiative? in
I
Australia.
have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think those sort of initiatives are super important for men or for women with regards to just doing things with each other. One of my first podcast episodes is with a researcher from UCL who looks at the impacts of physical activity on depression. And
Uh-huh.
there's an actual neurological sort of mechanism behind it, which is surrounded by, dopamine and dopamine signaling, which is another sort of pet sort of obsession of mine. Um, and one thing I've realized is when you leave your room, yes, you leave that sort of cage of rumination, which is the worst thing to do. But also, you go out, you're with your mates, you're doing whatever it is, the gym, an activity, you're outside. Subconsciously, you're, really taking gratification from all the little things that you wouldn't sort of take pleasure from, like just automatically. And that really puts your life into perspective and really gives you that sort of that confidence that, I'm here and life's great. Like it's okay sort of thing. But it's a negative feedback because when you're in that sort of struggling sort of mood and you just want to isolate yourself, you want to be lonely, you don't really want to talk to people. How do you get out of that? What is it? Is it just discipline? Is it reaching out and going to a friend, look, I'm struggling, you need to
Yeah.
drag me out of this room sort of thing? Because that's what, I mean, we're talking about differences with regards to, probably struggles and depression, but that's
Yeah.
what depression does, right?
Yeah.
Depression essentially puts you in a room, you isolate yourself, you ruminate, and it's a negative feedback. And so it's really hard to get out of that
Mm.
room unless you take action.
Yeah. I'm thinking of this from two sides.
Mm-hmm.
So one is if I'm the person
Yep.
in the negative situation, and one is if someone comes to me. So I think sometimes I literally allow myself to be lonely and to do my own thing, but I will communicate that with my closest, nearest and dearest. So obviously the people I live with, to just kind of say, right, just leave me. I'm not in a great place and I just need to focus on something. And maybe they've got used to that over the years and we've kind of got that understanding. But what I like about that is that my children now sometimes will in a way communicate similar, that just leave me alone for a few hours and I need to just chill. Maybe they've had a stressful week, maybe they've had a fallout with a friend. But I think also there's times when I do need to just say, right, I'm not in a good place and I need to talk about it. And whoever that person might be, I go to, whether it's a friend, whether it's a partner, whether it's a parent. So I think there's two very different ways I deal with it depending on what the issue is. So if I am alone and I think I'm not coming out of it, I think then I know, right, I need to speak to someone, whether it's within work, maybe a line manager, just somebody to be able to say, okay, I'm not good. And I need to do something, and maybe I'll get some advice and I might follow that. When it comes to friends coming to me, I'll advise similar things, but also sometimes I've given a real reality, and let's say for someone who's a people pleaser, and I'm kind of saying, well, you need to not do what you're doing because it's not making you happy and you're not also getting any gratitude for what you're doing. And they've not necessarily liked that. And I know I've been a bit taken aback because maybe they thought I was only going to give sympathy and not what I think is a reality. But I think sometimes giving people a real picture is what they need.
Yeah.
Other times it's empathy.
Yeah.
But obviously in a very kind way, not in a
It's tough
judgmental
love.
or
Tough love.
yeah, but not in a judgmental way, not in a nasty way. And I think you can only do that with the people you're really close with. So I think honestly, there's not one answer. It's different, I suppose, mechanisms you've got to use for different outcomes. And then if that doesn't work, you maybe go to the next thing in your bank of ways of coping. So I think one thing when you're doing safety plans with people is having these lists, well, what are you going to do if you feel like this again? And maybe you work through essentially your 4 or 5 things until one thing works at that time. But it gives a purpose, going back to the beginning, even having a task to do, whether it's talking to a friend or phoning up a parent, that gives you a purpose at that time to try and do. So I think having a purpose, no matter how big or small, is really important to not feel like you say hopeless and that you just can't do anything.
I think, yeah, I mean, so I run ultra marathons. It's my personality. Um, and the one thing I've learned in races is you have multiple checkpoints, say every 5 or 10 miles. And if you're doing a 60-mile race, you're gonna have 6 checkpoints, 6 to 12 checkpoints. And when you get to points in races where you have stress reactors and you're thrown up and everything sucks, the only thing that you sort of tell yourself is I need to get to that next checkpoint only, and that's it. And I think, I don't know, you've worked a lot in sort of acute suicide crisis, but I think one of, let's say, the symptoms or the feelings that someone would have before taking their own life is that they can't seem to see the future. It's not programmable. I mean, they could have a job offer or, whatever in their future, but they just can't seem to see it. And so they can't persuade themselves to be like, okay, I'm going to stay in this world for X amount of time. What do you say to someone in that sort of moment where they've lost all hope, they can't see the future, and their mind and their body and everything is telling them just to say, I can't see the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's why my podcast is called Let's Talk Hope, for starters, because I think somehow you need to bring back hopefulness, from hopelessness. I think from experience of being in that situation, it's talking through the realities of, okay, if this is something that you did go through with, what kind of are the consequences of that, and who's going to be affected, who isn't, and things like that. And I found by having those conversations, people have come back to thinking, well, actually, yeah, no, I don't want to do this because of those people, and normally it is people, whether it's children or family members. And I think it's just reminding them of the effect on the people left behind. And it's not for them to feel like, oh, I've been selfish. They haven't at all. But it's actually, do you want them to feel that way? And, is that what you want out of this? Because a lot of people think, well, people will be better off without me. Also, sometimes, and it depends on who I'm talking to, but sometimes I have reminded people that if your family member's bereaved by suicide, their risk is going to go up massively to die by suicide as well, or to have other negative health consequences because of the impact of this. So as much as you think you're not helpful to them or they're going to be better off without you, in reality, they're actually going to be worse off for many reasons that you probably haven't even thought about. But it depends who I'm talking to and what the context is and whether I say that. So I can sometimes come forward with facts, which I think can be good sometimes. It's not just me saying it. This is factually there in the evidence base. But sometimes it's good to share that with people because they don't know it, because they're not from this field. But it's actually a real eye-opener. And they don't want that to happen. And they're not doing it for that purpose, to put their own families potentially at higher risk even. But yes, and also it's reminding people of what is good in your life and, could you work towards that again? And so I think it's having honest opinions, but I don't ever talk to people if they talk to me about the fact they're thinking about suicide in a way that I'm shocked or I think it's horrendous that they're even thinking that. I'm definitely not judgmental when it comes to them talking to me about it. And I think that's a helpful thing. I think that's a protective thing in a way, that I'm not being judgmental and I'm quite straightforward. I will ask, are you thinking about suicide? And that's something I've learned in trainings I've been on. I've been on the assist training. I've done some of the papyrus trainings. And the message is always be direct and ask people, are you thinking of ending your life? And actually, by them being able to talk to you about it, I think brings the reality to them sometimes of, oh God, I am thinking about that. But it makes them process what they're thinking rather than just impulsively doing something without that process of thought of what the consequences might be.
Yeah, I think highlighting the consequences is so important. I feel like impatience is the enemy almost, where you have this sort of pain in your head and you don't know what to do about it. You feel like there's no other way out of this and you're impatient. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it's quite funny because that's the name of your podcast. But when I was going through a dark time, I openly said to my mates, I said, I don't know if I'm ever going to get out of this. It's been months. Like I can't see it. And he just went to me, this too shall pass. Like you just need to have hope that whatever you're going through is just going to pass. And I think this is where sort of reframing comes in. I'm really big on reframing,
Yeah.
where I got to my lowest point and I was like, I can't sink any more lower. So let's reframe it. That means I have nothing to lose.
Uh-huh.
It means I can do whatever I want because it's like the world's my oyster. I've reached rock bottom. The only way is up. So let's have it, sort of
Yeah.
thing. And that sort of reframing has been, very much powerful in how I see the world and when I tell other people how they see the world. And it's sort of, I don't know, let's see what you think about this. It's sort of converting this sort of vulnerability, let's say, of like, I feel weak and I feel low to more fuel and courage, let's say. And it's like, this has happened, but let's spin it into a purpose and let's spin it into something good so I can, help other people as well. And I can only help other people if I'm well myself. And so it always comes back to this sort of service-based element because I
Uh-huh.
think as humans, we are sort of wired for service. And that's going to be different from everyone else. Some people are going to be service to the world, service to charity or philanthropy. And for other people, it's just going to be service to their mum or service to their dad or their wife. But I think service is fully sort of ingrained within us, and sort of understanding that and unlocking that can sort of provide a lot of hope, I think.
Well, within our school suicide prevention work, the cognitive behavioral therapy at one of the interventions, that's an online intervention, is called Reframe It, which
Okay.
I think, that's the purpose. It is. It's reframing your thoughts. But I think, it's easy to say that, oh yeah, you should look at reframing your thoughts. But if you're not in that headspace
It's
at that
difficult.
time,
Yeah.
as you know, it's a difficult process. But even just having that friend that you mentioned who said, you've got to just keep positive basically and think there is going to be light at the end of the tunnel. There is going to be hope. And I think that's what some of the feedback from, suicide survivors, as they call themselves on the podcast, is they're talking about that. They're talking about how they turned it around. And a lot of what they're doing, I think what you've just hit the nail on the head there, which I've not thought of it that way before, is everyone's doing service. For one person's created the Hub of Hope app, which you put in a postcode, and then I think for the whole of the UK and for Northern Ireland, you get up all the mental health services in your area. They've led on to creating something like that that's been adopted by NHS services and things like that. So other people are taking it back to their job, where they're dealing with a lot of complex people who regularly find themselves in a suicidal crisis, and they're taking all of their learning from their own experience to there. And I think, I think that's how maybe people do cope and move forwards, is by putting a purpose to what they've been through. And people with lived experience of bereavement, you obviously, I don't know if you've seen the work of the Three Dads Walking, who lost their three daughters to suicide, and they've been walking up and down England really, and Wales, Scotland, perhaps, in the memory of their daughters, but also to raise a lot of money and awareness for young people suicide, so for Papyrus. And they're trying to get a change on the education system to have suicide prevention on the PHSE kind of curriculum. So I think a lot of people are putting their lived experience to that use, but they've also spoken about their own crisis points within that experience.
Yeah, I think, putting all of this together, I think you need to be selfish in order to be of service in the future. It can't be the other way around. You
Yeah.
can't be of service, otherwise you are being selfish to those who you are trying to serve. And I'm a big fan of Stoicism. I read a lot of Stoicism, and, is the common sort of in Stoicism because it provides you a foundation or a home base to come back to. So even now, if I have a blip or any sort of negative thoughts, it's go back to your purpose that you wrote down. at the start of the year and meditate on it, think about it, and remember why you're doing X, Y, and Z. And, I think it's a very sort of simple line of thinking, but it's one I think which is really hard to get to unless you're highly sort of introspective and sort of self-reflective.
Yeah.
How could one be more self-reflective? I think as a 25-year-old guy, I'm incredibly immature still, and I'm working on it, but it's taken a lot of work to really get emotionally intelligent. And I think as guys, we care about going to the gym, being physically strong, trying to boost our career, that we sort of put emotional intelligence and self-reflection and introspection away.
Yeah.
So how could one be more self-reflective? Is it really just digging in without ruminating too much?
I think it's something you said before about living in the present. I think that's something that's done less, maybe sometimes, by males. And again, that's just from experience of family members and friends, where I feel like I'm saying to people, remember all those good things you do have and live for today. Don't be thinking about the 3 generations ahead that you're worrying about today for some reason. So I think living in the present is a huge thing. And how you get men or women to think about it, again, I think it's education and knowledge, but you've got to be open to it. Like you've said, you're reading on Stoicism. If you're not willing to do that, you're not going to learn. If you're not willing to read about why living in the present is important for your health, it's very difficult. So I think just trying to educate, but then I think a lot of it comes down to that individual to actually stop, find some time to do these things. I think the problem nowadays is everyone does too much all the time. They're busy all the time. Every weekend, there's a social gathering or there's a this or that. I'm quite happy to not go to many, many things. I don't feel like I need to keep up with what's going on around me, but I think many people do. And I think that can have a consequence as well for your own well-being. So I think allowing yourself time and space to actually work on those things is very important. But I don't think a lot of people give it to themselves. And then they may spiral into these negative places, but again, not allow themselves the time to recover or get better or, take time out sometimes. That's why people do go off sick, because sometimes you do need to stop and you do need to regain your strength and have time maybe for self-reflection.
I think there's an element of reframing again, potentially. And this is from my own sort of my personal insight. I spent so long chasing, let's say, quantifiable sort of measures, thinking that if I don't open myself up and I just stay emotionally armored, that I'm going to achieve what I want to achieve. And, I did. And that's great. Until, it sort of burst right open and I realized this is the wrong way to do it. And so I reframed it and was like, okay, I think in order to be a better scientist, a better brother, son, boyfriend, whatever, I not only need to be sort of physically strong and smart, which is something you could quantify by looking in the mirror or publishing papers, but I need to be emotionally more intelligent. And so it was reframing it to, okay, I need to be more introspective and self-reflective, not just for me, but for my career and for my purpose. And I think that sort of reframing has been very important in me being able to be open to the fact that you can grow your mindset, you can read more about psychology, about philosophy, whatever it is, for that specific purpose. And it comes back to reframing, I think. But hopefully you don't need to reach rock bottom to realize that. And I think that's one of the good things about podcasts and about your podcast and talking about it is like, we don't want everyone to get to that situation.
Exactly.
We want people to do the steps that we're doing before you get to that situation and to prevent it, not before you get to that situation, prevent it.
And I think the biggest reason for these podcasts is to kind of highlight this is normal. It's normal for even, I can say for both of us, with the degrees we have and the qualifications we have, would be classes, highly educated people in an education sense. And it's fine. Even if you're highly educated, even if you have got loads of money, even if you have got a beautiful family, it's okay if you find yourself in a place where you're not happy and you have got stress that's making you distressed, and you can work through it. And there's lots of different ways that you can look at working through it. And also, I think sometimes it's not a negative thing to have negative experiences, because then sometimes you appreciate more your positive experiences. So I think that's the bit of acceptance as well, that these are the cycles and the dips and up and downs of life. And maybe with this whole social media, perfect images we see, we think every day should be perfect. And maybe that's a reality that we shouldn't have allowed ourselves to have. And because it's at a detriment to ourselves then, is that when we do have a bad day, it's like, oh my God. So I think, yeah, just living in the present, but also the present can sometimes not be great. And allowing yourself to know that.
Yeah, I think my deputy porter of my college, he told me a great piece of advice. It wasn't advice, it was more of a saying. He said, when doors close, a window opens. And I think people who do have struggles, would it be to, relationship breakdowns or whatnot, they see that obviously as their world falling apart, but need to tell themselves that, maybe down the line, something better is going to happen. If you just stick within the race and you just stay within the fight and you just grind it and you graft it, like something better will happen. It's just going to take time.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm a firm believer that things happen for a reason. And then I think if you can get some of these sayings and thoughts in your everyday living,
Yeah, it's positive
can
affirmations
really,
almost. Yeah.
it can really help.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot more topics we could have touched or talked about, but maybe we'll leave them for
Yeah.
our next
Yeah.
conversation.
I have one more question just to round it up really. So I've taken from this a lot, which is great. Be selfish, be of service, be present, and be positive. I think that's a nice short little tagline. As a professional, what do you hope people will carry with them after this conversation?
I think those 4 things you've just said are really
Brilliant.
important, to be honest. But I think knowing that things will get better, and we've gone through struggles and we've still achieved. You're, I'm sure, going to achieve much more yet. You're still very young. But yeah, I think just to keep going and hopefully find something positive to walk towards.
Been a pleasure. This has been very insightful. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.